Imagine trying to feed your family when meat is rationed to just a few ounces per week. Butter is nearly impossible to find, and every food item requires government coupons. Now imagine making that meager portion of meat stretch to feed 6 hungry mouths. This was the reality for millions of families during World War I. Between 1914 and 1918, food became a weapon of war as much as bullets and bombs. Governments on both sides demanded civilian sacrifice so soldiers could eat. The question wasn't, what's for dinner? It was, how do we make dinner exist at all? The answer came in dishes like potato pie, an ingenious combination of mashed potatoes and tiny amounts of meat baked together into something that felt like a proper meal. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't gourmet, but it was survival disguised as comfort food. By the end of this video, I'll reveal the surprising ingredient that housewives secretly added to potato pie to make it taste richer, an ingredient that seems obvious now, but was considered scandalously wasteful during the war. But first, we need to understand just how desperate food shortages became and why the humble potato suddenly became the most important ingredient in every kitchen. When World War I began in 1914, Britain imported about 60% of its food. Within months, German U-boats were sinking supply ships in the Atlantic, and suddenly that dependence became a national crisis. By 1917, during the worst of the U-boat campaign, Britain was just 6 weeks away from complete food exhaustion. 6 weeks. That's how close an entire nation came to starvation. The government's response was rationing, propaganda, and pressure. Massive campaigns urged citizens to eat less meat, save the wheat, and use every scrap. Food waste became almost treasonous. Throwing away leftovers was portrayed as helping the enemy. When formal rationing finally began in 1918, the allowances were shockingly small. Meat, 15 ounces per week, that's less than a pound. Butter, 4 ounces per week. Sugar, 8 ounces per week. Bacon, 4 ounces per week. For context, 15 ounces of meat is roughly 2 small chicken breasts. That's for an entire week, for all meals. Families had to stretch these tiny amounts across breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 7 days. The Dig for Victory campaign encouraged everyone to grow vegetables. Parks, lawns, even the grounds of Buckingham Palace were plowed up for food production. And what did everyone grow? Potatoes. Potatoes didn't require ration coupons. They grew relatively easily in British climate. They provided calories, substance, and the comforting illusion of a full meal. Potatoes became the foundation of wartime survival, and potato pie became the most resourceful way to use them. Potato pie wasn't a single recipe. It was a concept that every household adapted based on what they had available. But the basic structure remained consistent. The foundation was a thick layer of mashed potatoes pressed into a baking dish. On top of this went whatever meat you could spare, often mixed with vegetables to stretch it further. Another layer of mashed potatoes sealed everything inside. The whole thing was baked until golden and crispy on top. Let's break down a typical 1917 potato pie recipe. The potato base. 2 pounds of potatoes, boiled and mashed. A splash of milk, if available. Often water was substituted. A tiny scraping of margarine or dripping. Salt, never rationed, thank goodness. The mash had to be thick, thicker than you'd serve normally. It needed structural integrity to hold together as a crust. Water worked better than milk for this purpose, though cooks would never admit it made the dish better. This is where resourcefulness shone. A typical filling might include 8 ounces of minced meat, beef, mutton, or mysterious mixed meat from the butcher. 1 onion, chopped fine. 1 carrot, diced small. Leftover gravy or stock if available. Fresh or dried herbs from the garden. Perhaps turnips, parsnips, or any other vegetables on hand. Notice something? 8 ounces of meat divided among 6 people is barely an ounce per person. The vegetables weren't just additions. They were critical bulk that made the meat visible, that gave the illusion of generosity where there was only scarcity. Assembly was straightforward but required care. 1. Press half the mashed potato firmly into a greased baking dish, creating a base and walls. 2. Add the meat and vegetable filling, spreading evenly. 3. Top with remaining mashed potato, sealing the edges carefully. 4. Score the top with a fork in decorative patterns. This wasn't vanity. It helped crispy bits form. 5. Brush with a tiny amount of dripping or margarine if available. Baking time, 40 to 45 minutes at moderate heat. Housewives didn't have temperature dials. They went by experience and intuition. The goal was a golden brown, crispy top with the filling heated through and steaming hot. The result looked substantial. It smelled comforting. It used almost no rationed ingredients. And it could feed a family that might otherwise have gone to bed hungry. Potato pie wasn't just about calories. It was about maintaining morale in impossible circumstances. Consider the psychological difference between serving your family a tiny portion of meat with some boiled vegetables versus presenting a golden, crispy pie that you cut into generous slices. The first is a visible reminder of deprivation. The second feels like a proper meal. The crispy potato crust created texture and satisfaction. That crunch was important. It made eating feel more substantial, more normal. In a time when food was soft, scarce, and monotonous, texture became luxury. When you cut into potato pie, steam rose. You could see chunks of meat and vegetables embedded in the filling. It looked generous even when it wasn't. This wasn't deception, it was hope made edible. For housewives managing wartime households, these dishes represented competence under pressure. Government propaganda told women that feeding their families well despite rationing was patriotic duty. Potato pie let them fulfill that duty with dignity. For children who didn't fully understand war, but absolutely understood hunger, potato pie meant going to bed full. That mattered more than we can probably imagine now. These dishes also created continuity. Despite war, despite loss, despite rationing, families still gathered for dinner. They still had pie, even if it wasn't the pie of peacetime. Normal rituals continued, and that psychological stability was survival in its own right. The genius of potato pie was its infinite adaptability. Every household developed their own version based on availability, regional traditions, and personal resourcefulness. Northern industrial cities often included black pudding or other offal in the filling, items that didn't require ration coupons and added richness. Rural areas might include rabbit, pigeon, or other game when available. Vegetables from kitchen gardens featured prominently. Coastal communities sometimes incorporated fish scraps, heads, bones, bits too small to sell, creating something closer to fish pie. Meatless Mondays. The government encouraged meatless days. Potato pie adapted beautifully. Lentils, dried peas, mushrooms, and extra vegetables created a filling that looked similar to the meat version. Resourceful cooks added whatever they could forage or grow. Wild garlic for flavor. Nettles, free, nutritious, and everywhere. Dried herbs saved from summer gardens. Bone broth made from literally anything with bones. Recipe books from the era are fascinating. Margins filled with handwritten notes showing substitutions, improvements, and creative solutions. Used water instead of milk, worked fine. Added turnip, nobody noticed. Foraged mushrooms, made it special. These annotations tell the real story of wartime cooking. Constant adaptation, endless creativity, and the determination to make something palatable from almost nothing. Today, potato pie might seem like poverty food, but it actually holds some surprising appeal for modern cooks. Contemporary versions upgrade the concept. Aged cheddar in the mash, caramelized onions in the filling, fresh herbs throughout, perhaps some wine in the gravy. It becomes something deliberately chosen rather than desperately necessitated. It's also remarkably practical. It makes ahead beautifully, freezes well, reheats perfectly. For busy modern households, it solves different problems than it did in 1917, but it still solves problems. And in times of economic uncertainty or when food prices spike, the logic of potato pie returns. Stretching protein with vegetables and potatoes isn't just historical curiosity. It's practical economics that applies in any era. Remember that scandalously wasteful ingredient I promised to reveal? Here it is. Butter. Or more specifically, saving just enough butter to brush on top of the potato pie before baking. This seems unremarkable now, but during World War I, using precious butter for flavor rather than nutrition was borderline subversive. Butter was for children, for the ill, for spreading thinly on bread. Using it to make a dish taste richer? That was luxury in an era when luxury was unpatriotic. But housewives knew something important. That tiny amount of butter, maybe a teaspoon brushed across the entire top, transformed the psychological experience of the meal. It made the crust golden instead of pale. It created richness of flavor that signaled comfort and normalcy. Was it wasteful? Technically, yes. Was it necessary? Absolutely. Because feeding people isn't just about calories. It's about care, about maintaining humanity in inhumane circumstances. Potato pie reminds us that cooking through crisis isn't about perfection. It's about resourcefulness, creativity, and the determination to feed the people you love no matter what challenges you face. The next time you hear someone dismiss simple food as just potatoes or peasant food, remember the ingenuity, the care, and the small rebellions hidden in dishes like potato pie. Sometimes the humblest foods tell the most profound stories.